The galaxy had always been a place of fragile peace. For centuries, the Concordia, a powerful alliance of alien species, had maintained order, their influence stretching across vast star systems. They ruled with an iron fist, ensuring no one dared challenge their authority. Humanity, still a young species, was nothing more than a curiosity to them. Earth's small-scale existence, locked in its corner of the galaxy, was not worth anyone's time. But all of that was about to change. General Xavier Rhodes sat in his command chair aboard the Vanguard, Earth's newest warship, staring at the stars. His brow furrowed as the sudden, unexpected transmission blared through the speakers. It was a cryptic message, a signal that had been bouncing across the galaxy for days. It was unlike anything the humans had encountered before, and it carried a single clear message: the war begins now. This wasn't just any message. It was a call to arms, not a desperate plea for help, but a challenge, something humanity had never sent to the galactic powers before. Rhodes knew this wasn't a coincidence. Someone or something had purposely sent this signal, and now humanity was being drawn into something much bigger than anyone could imagine. The crew around him quickly scrambled to analyze the signal's origin, but Rhodes had already made up his mind. Humanity would not hide in the shadows anymore. The time for silence was over. The time for war had arrived. On Earth, the news spread like wildfire. The president, a woman named Ann Novak, addressed the world with urgency in her voice. "We've received a message from the stars. It's a declaration. The galaxy is no longer a distant dream. It is part of our future. We are part of it now." Her words rang in every mind across Earth, awakening a sense of purpose in every citizen. The message was simple. Humanity was no longer a quiet bystander. The future of the galaxy was at stake, and Earth would no longer stand idle. At the Galactic Council, the leaders of the Concordia were meeting when they first heard of humanity's sudden appearance on the galactic stage. They laughed at first, dismissing the message as a joke. How could a primitive species like humanity pose any threat? The Concordia had seen countless species rise and fall, and humanity was no different. They had little understanding of the true power the Concordia wielded, nor the history that shaped it. But there was one leader, Zirath, the High Commander of the Dracarian species, who wasn't so sure. He had seen enough to know that underestimating any species, especially one as unpredictable as humanity, could lead to disaster. His warning fell on deaf ears, and the Council brushed him aside. They were too secure in their power to fear anything, least of all humans. Back on Earth, General Rhodes knew the stakes were high. The message sent to the galaxy wasn't just a declaration of war. It was a signal that humanity had arrived. And now, the galaxy would have to adjust to the undeniable reality. Humanity was no longer insignificant. The old order would crumble, and a new era was beginning. Rhodes turned to his crew, his eyes steady with resolve. "Prepare for launch," he ordered. "We're going to show the galaxy what humanity is capable of." As the Vanguard powered up, its engines humming with energy, Rhodes couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just about Earth's survival. This was about proving to the galaxy that humanity's potential was limitless. The war had just begun, and the galaxy would soon learn that underestimating humanity would be their greatest mistake. The galaxy was in turmoil. The Concordia, long seen as an unshakable force, had spent centuries building its empire. With countless species under their control, they were confident in their strength. But the sudden rise of humanity changed everything. At the heart of the Galactic Council, a vast chamber on the planet Janar, the Concordia leaders sat in a grand hall, their faces grim and full of doubt. Representatives from various species were gathered, some angry, others nervous, but all were unsure of what to make of the humans' sudden appearance. The Council had never expected humanity to become a player in the galactic politics. "These humans," said Zorath, the leader of the Rillian species, his voice laced with disbelief, "are they truly bold enough to challenge us, to declare war on the entire galaxy?" The room was filled with murmurs of agreement. It seemed impossible. The humans had only recently discovered space travel, their technology still far behind the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. But a strange, undeniable feeling spread throughout the room. Something about humanity's sudden appearance felt different. General Rhodes and his small delegation were brought before the council. The humans walked into the grand hall with steady steps, their faces unyielding. Rhodes, a seasoned military leader, had not come to plead or negotiate. He had come to make a statement. Humanity was no longer a silent spectator. The war had started, and they intended to win. The High Commander of the Dracarian species, Zerath, who had warned his fellow leaders about the humans, watched with growing concern. He had seen how humans fought, how they adapted to challenges faster than any species he had ever encountered. He knew better than to underestimate them. "General Rhodes," said Lady Vanya, a representative of the Tavara, an ancient species, known for their wisdom. "You have boldly declared war on us. Do you truly think you can win against the might of the Concordia?" Rhodes stood tall, his eyes scanning the room. "You've had centuries to rule the galaxy. You think it's your right to control everything, but the time for that is over. Humanity is here to stay. We've fought for our survival on Earth and we'll do the same out here." His words echoed through the chamber. The room fell silent. The Concordia leaders, who had been so certain of their superiority, now felt the weight of his words. Rhodes wasn't speaking as an individual. He was speaking for every human across the stars. The debate among the council grew heated. Some were angry, others confused. But the one thing they could all agree on was this: humanity was unlike any species they had ever encountered. Their boldness was something new. Their spirit, something none of the alien races had ever experienced before. Outside the council hall, in the darkness of space, the Vanguard remained silent, its sleek, powerful form orbiting a nearby moon. General Rhodes knew that the time for negotiation had passed. There would be no turning back now. The Concordia was split. Some of the alien factions argued for an immediate attack, eager to crush this upstart species before they could cause any real harm. But others hesitated, wondering if humanity might be more than they appeared. The galaxy was starting to shudder with doubt, and for the first time in a long while, the Concordia found themselves questioning whether their centuries-old rule might soon come to an end. As Rhodes left the council hall, he felt a strange sense of pride. The battle had just begun, but humanity had already made its mark. The galaxy would never be the same. And in the days to come, the Concordia would come to understand one thing clearly: underestimating humanity was their greatest mistake. The war had officially begun, and the galaxy was in shock. Humanity, once considered a minor species on the edge of the universe, had taken the boldest step imaginable. With General Xavier Rhodes at the helm, Earth was no longer a silent observer, in the grand scheme of things. Humanity was now a force to be reckoned with. The Concordia, however, was far from ready to accept this reality. Their leaders were divided, but the alien alliance had a powerful military at their disposal. They had ships, weapons, and technology far beyond anything humanity had ever seen. But the Concordia had underestimated something critical: their enemy's determination. The first strike came from a small human fleet led by the Vanguard. They arrived in the outskirts of the Rillian sector, where a massive Concordia stronghold stood, heavily guarded. General Rhodes, aware of the risks, had taken a calculated gamble. It was a risky plan, but humanity had nothing to lose. The attack was swift and brutal. The humans knew that they had to take the fight to the Concordia fast, or risk being overwhelmed. Using their newly developed weapons, the humans sent waves of electromagnetic pulses that temporarily disabled the Concordia's shields, leaving their ships vulnerable. Within minutes, human fighters swarmed in like a deadly swarm of hornets, tearing through enemy ships with laser precision. The battle was intense, but the Concordia fleet wasn't prepared for the speed and unexpected tactics of the humans. For once, the aliens found themselves outmaneuvered and caught off guard. "This isn't possible," muttered Zorath, the leader of the Rillian species, as he watched from a distance. His fleet, once thought to be unbeatable, was being torn apart by the humans. How are they doing this? The Concordia's commanders scrambled to respond, but it was too late. The human attack was relentless. The Vanguard and its fleet disabled the Concordia's flagship and destroyed their supply lines. The humans, with their newfound technology and sheer willpower, had secured an overwhelming victory. The first battle was won, but it came at a cost. Many human soldiers had died, and Rhodes knew that this was only the beginning. Back on Earth, the news of the victory spread like wildfire. People everywhere rejoiced, but General Rhodes knew that they couldn't afford to become complacent. The Concordia would retaliate, and their forces would be even more dangerous. In a private briefing, Rhodes and his top commanders discussed their next move. They had a major advantage now, but they needed to press it quickly before the Concordia could regroup. "We've proven that we can take them down," Rhodes said, looking at his officers. "But this is just the first wave. We need to keep the pressure on them. No holding back. The galaxy needs to see what humanity is capable of." The war was spreading. What had begun as a single strike against the Concordia had now become an open conflict. Humanity, once thought to be weak and insignificant, was showing the galaxy that it could fight and win. The Concordia, now forced to regroup and reassess their strategies, knew that they couldn't let humanity continue its onslaught. This was no longer just about controlling the galaxy, it was about survival. And in the cold depths of space, humanity's resolve was growing stronger by the day. As the battle lines were drawn, one thing became clear. The fires of war had been ignited, and they would not be easily extinguished. Humanity had entered the war, and they weren't backing down. The galaxy would either accept them as a new power or face the consequences of underestimating their strength. As the war raged on, the galaxy found itself teetering on the edge of chaos. Humanity had proven itself a fierce and unpredictable opponent, and the Concordia, once united in their power, was now facing cracks within their alliance. What had once been a united front of species determined to keep their rule over the galaxy was starting to show signs of fracture. Some factions were beginning to question their loyalty to the Concordia, while others quietly considered aligning with humanity. The first cracks came from the Za'aran, a species known for their cold logic and long history of political maneuvering. They had always been neutral, preferring to stay out of the conflicts between the galactic powers. But now they were beginning to see things differently. The Za'aran Council, led by High Leader Ilthar, convened in secret to discuss the situation. "We cannot ignore what's happening," Ilthar said, his sharp eyes focused on the holographic map of the galaxy. "Humanity's strength is undeniable. We risk being caught in the middle of this war, and if we continue to side with the Concordia, we may find ourselves on the losing side." His fellow leaders nodded in agreement. The Za'aran had always valued survival above all else, and siding with a losing power was not in their best interest. Some were eager to consider an alliance with humanity, believing it to be the safer option, but others were still unsure. Meanwhile, General Rhodes and his commanders were aware of the growing unrest within the Concordia. They had been receiving secret transmissions from several alien factions expressing interest in negotiating a possible alliance. The humans were not just fighting for their own survival anymore. They were beginning to shift the power balance of the entire galaxy. In a meeting with his top generals, Rhodes made it clear that they couldn't waste time. "If the Concordia is cracking, we need to take advantage of this moment. We'll push harder, hit them where it hurts the most. But we also need to be strategic. If we can get some of these factions to join us, it could tip the scales in our favor." The decision was made. The humans would launch a series of covert operations to sow discord within the Concordia's ranks and win over key allies. Rhodes knew that winning the war wasn't just about military strength, it was about manipulating the galaxy's political landscape. To do that, they needed to secure more allies, and the Za'aran, with their advanced technology and political influence, were the perfect target. The first step was a bold move. A small human fleet disguised as a neutral force approached Zaran space under the cover of darkness. They were carrying a message, a diplomatic proposal offering peace and an alliance against the Concordia's tyranny. Ilthar, who had already been thinking about the future, agreed to meet in secret with a human envoy. When the meeting took place, Rhodes was not there in person, but he had sent his trusted diplomat, Ambassador Lyra Caldwell, to speak on behalf of Earth. The discussion was tense but civil. The Zaran were skeptical, yet the humans' offer of mutual respect and the promise of shared technology was too tempting to ignore. After hours of intense negotiation, the Zaran agreed to consider an alliance. As the talks continued, the Concordia's response came quickly. The Council, realizing that the Zaran might be slipping from their grasp, sent a diplomatic envoy to counter the humans' offer. They promised the Zaran more resources, more power, and most importantly, safety. But Ilthar, the Zaran leader, was not so easily swayed. "There is no safety in standing with the losing side," Ilthar said coldly when the Concordia's envoy made their plea. "The galaxy is changing, and we must change with it." The tension between the two sides was growing. The Zaran, though cautious, were moving closer to aligning with humanity, and this shift was the first step in what could become a new alliance of species united against the Concordia's dominance. Back on Earth, General Rhodes watched these developments closely. He knew the importance of this moment. If they could secure the Zaran's loyalty, other factions would follow. Humanity was no longer fighting alone. They were building the foundation of a new galactic order, one where they would no longer be looked down upon, but respected as equals. The battle for unity had begun, and humanity was taking the first step in reshaping the galaxy. The war had escalated beyond anyone's expectations. Humanity's rapid success had shaken the very foundation of the Concordia, and now the galaxy was watching as the tides of power began to shift. General Rhodes and his fleet had gained a few victories, but the cost was becoming more apparent with every passing day. Victory was sweet, but it came with a heavy price. Back on Earth, the mood was a mixture of pride and anxiety. The people cheered for their military triumphs, their faith in humanity's potential growing with each new success. But there were whispers in the corridors of power, and Rhodes knew that the war, though promising, was taking a toll on his forces. The humans were winning battles, but they were losing soldiers, resources, and morale. In a briefing room on the Vanguard, General Rhodes stood before a map of the galaxy. His crew was gathered around him, their faces grim as they discussed their next move. "We've gained significant ground, but we've paid for it," Rhodes said, his voice low but steady. "Our supply lines are stretched thin, and we're running low on the resources we need to maintain this momentum." Colonel Evelyn Torres, his second-in-command, looked up from the digital map. "We've been attacking on too many fronts. We've stretched our forces too thin. The Concordia is regrouping. They'll retaliate soon." Rhodes nodded. He knew they were on the edge of a dangerous precipice. The Concordia, though shaken, was still a formidable enemy. Their next move would likely be their most decisive, and if humanity wasn't careful, they could be pushed back into a corner. "We need to take a step back," Rhodes said. "We can't afford to keep fighting like this. We need a plan to consolidate our power, re-establish supply lines, and give our soldiers time to regroup. It's not about the next battle, it's about the war." But even as Rhodes spoke, a sense of urgency gnawed at him. He had pushed his soldiers to their limits. Humanity had fought fiercely, but the reality of war was beginning to settle in. The longer this conflict lasted, the more lives would be lost. And he couldn't shake the feeling that every victory was costing more than he was willing to pay. Meanwhile, in the heart of Concordia space, the Alliance's leaders gathered for a critical meeting. The Rillian leader Zorath was growing frustrated. His fleet had suffered devastating losses, and despite their size and strength, the Concordia had been caught off guard by humanity's unexpected tactics. "This cannot continue," Zorath growled. "These humans, they are relentless. We cannot afford another defeat. The galaxy is starting to doubt our strength. and if we do not act soon, we will lose everything. High Commander Zareth of the Dracarian species, who had been the first to warn the Concordia about underestimating humanity, agreed. We've underestimated them long enough. It's time we put an end to this. The humans have shown their strength, now we need to show them ours. The Concordia knew they had to strike back, and strike hard. A new plan was set in motion. The Concordia would launch a massive counteroffensive, focusing all their strength on wiping out the human fleet in one final, crushing blow. Back on Earth, the pressure was mounting. Rhodes knew what was coming. The humans had become a symbol of resistance, but now the Concordia's wrath was inevitable. His soldiers were tired, their morale beginning to dip, but he couldn't let them falter. The stakes had never been higher. Prepare for the worst, Rhodes said, his voice heavy with resolve. We've shown the galaxy that humanity is not to be underestimated, but the Concordia won't let us go easily. We'll face their full force soon. The battle ahead would not be won through sheer strength alone. It would take every ounce of strategy, every clever tactic, and the determination of every human soldier to survive. The cost of this war had been steep, and if humanity was to win, it would have to pay an even greater price. As the Vanguard prepared for its next mission, Rhodes stood at the bridge gazing out at the stars. In the depths of space, the Concordia was gathering their forces. Humanity was no longer fighting for survival alone. They were fighting to define their place in the galaxy. The price of victory would be high, but General Rhodes and his crew were prepared to pay it. The tension between the two sides was palpable. Humanity had made great strides in the war, but now the Concordia was preparing to unleash its full might. General Xavier Rhodes knew that the next battle could determine the fate of his people. The cost of victory was high, but it was clear that if humanity was to survive, they would need to face the Concordia head-on, no matter what the cost. The Vanguard sat in deep space just outside of Concordia's territory. The human fleet had been gathering, recovering from the brutal battles they had already fought. Soldiers trained harder, ships were repaired, and new technologies were quickly integrated into the fleet. But even as they prepared, doubts lingered in the air. How long could they keep up with the relentless pressure? Could they stand against the full force of the Concordia? On Earth, President Ann Novak had addressed the people, giving a speech that lifted their spirits. She reminded them that humanity had always thrived in the face of adversity. But even as she spoke, she knew that the worst was yet to come. The war had entered a new phase, one that would test the limits of what humanity could endure. The Concordia will come for us, she had said, her voice strong and steady. But we are not afraid. We are ready. Back aboard the Vanguard, General Rhodes and his command staff gathered in the war room. The map of the galaxy displayed the movements of Concordia forces. Intelligence reports confirmed that the Concordia was assembling a massive fleet in the Dracarian system, preparing for a decisive strike. The human fleet was outnumbered, but they had one advantage. They knew the Concordia's tactics. Everyone's been talking about the final blow for weeks now, Rhodes said, his voice quiet but filled with determination. They'll come at us with everything they have, but we've outsmarted them before and we'll do it again. Colonel Evelyn Torres, his right-hand officer, stood up. We've been preparing for this moment. We know the Concordia's strengths, but we know their weaknesses too. We've intercepted their communication. They're overconfident. That's their mistake. Rhodes nodded. That's exactly what we need to exploit. We can't fight them head on, but we can strike where they least expect it. The plan was set into motion. The human fleet would engage the Concordia head on, but only as a distraction. A small elite force would infiltrate the heart of the Concordia fleet, sabotaging their command structure and causing chaos within their ranks. The goal was not to win the battle, but to disrupt their ability to coordinate and fight effectively. It was a risky move, but it was the only chance they had. The Vanguard would lead the assault, drawing the Concordia's attention, while the smaller, faster ships would slip through the chaos and strike at their heart. As the human fleet moved into position, Rhodes couldn't help but feel the weight of what was about to happen. He had led his people through so much already, But this battle would be different. The Concordia was ruthless, and they had nothing left to lose. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, the Concordia fleet was ready. High Commander Zerath, of the Dracarian species, stood at the front of the command ship. His eyes narrowed as he looked out at the vast fleet before him. He had watched humanity grow stronger with every battle, but he still didn't understand how they had come this far. "They are desperate," Zerath muttered to his officers. "They are outmatched and outnumbered. We will crush them." But, even as he spoke with confidence, there was a nagging feeling deep inside him. The humans had shown an unexpected resourcefulness, and he couldn't shake the thought that this battle would not go as easily as he had hoped. The time for words had passed. The two sides were preparing to meet in the vast emptiness of space, where thousands of lives would be decided in the blink of an eye. General Rhodes looked out at the stars from the bridge of the Vanguard, his resolve hardening. This was no longer just a battle for survival. This was a fight for humanity's place in the galaxy. The shadow of retribution loomed over them, but humanity would face it head-on, and they would not back down. The moment of reckoning had arrived. The vast expanse of space was silent, but the tension in the air was almost unbearable. General Xavier Rhodes stood at the bridge of the Vanguard, watching as the human fleet slowly assembled, its ships gliding into position like a deadly swarm of hornets preparing to strike. The Concordia was out there, waiting, confident in their overwhelming numbers, but Rhodes had no intention of simply playing the role of the underdog. This battle, the one that would define the future of humanity, was more than just about military might. It was about showing the galaxy that humanity was not a fleeting spark in the darkness of space, but a force capable of shaking the very foundation of galactic power. "General," Colonel Evelyn Torres spoke up from her post, her voice steady, but filled with the weight of the upcoming conflict. "The Concordia fleet is closing in. We can't delay any longer." Rhodes nodded. The time for second thoughts was over. The human fleet was small compared to the Concordia's, but they had something that the aliens didn't: resolve. The plan was risky, but it was their best shot at turning the tide of war in humanity's favor. "We'll engage them head-on," Rhodes said, his voice unwavering. "But remember, our true target is their command structure. Disrupt their leadership, and the rest of their fleet will fall into disarray. Focus on the key ships, disable their communications, and keep the pressure on." Torres nodded, turning to relay the orders. The Vanguard would lead the charge with a group of smaller, faster ships positioned to infiltrate the Concordia's formation and hit them where it hurt the most. Across the galaxy, the Concordia fleet, led by High Commander Zerath, was preparing for the same battle. They had spent weeks positioning their forces, and their confidence was evident. The humans had been a thorn in their side, but now it was time to crush them once and for all. Zerath stood on the bridge of his flagship, his eyes narrowing as he surveyed the incoming fleet. The human ships were smaller, their technology less advanced, but they had proven to be more than just stubborn. They were resourceful, unpredictable, and that made them dangerous. "They are coming in," Zerath said, his voice calm yet filled with a quiet intensity. "Prepare to engage." The first volley of fire came from both sides, a burst of energy that lit up the darkness of space like a brilliant star. Human fighters darted through the debris, laser cannons blazing, while Concordia ships responded with brutal force. The sound of explosions echoed through the void as shields cracked and hulls were pierced. The war had begun in earnest. For the first few minutes, the battle seemed to be a contest of pure power. Concordia ships used their overwhelming numbers to push back the human fleet, but Rhodes had prepared for this. As the larger ships engaged head-on, the smaller human vessels began slipping through the cracks, weaving through the chaos to reach their true target. "Target their flagship," Rhodes ordered, his eyes fixed on the battle unfolding before him. "We take down Zerath's ship, and the rest of them will fall apart." With precision, the human fleet's elite fighters zeroed in on the command ship, cutting through enemy lines and avoiding the concentrated fire. But the Concordia was not easily defeated. They adapted quickly, and soon the humans were facing resistance they hadn't expected. A barrage of missiles and energy blasts from the Concordia fleet took out several smaller human ships, forcing Rhodes to adjust his strategy. But Rhodes wasn't the type to give up easily. As the battle raged on, he saw an opportunity, a weak spot in the Concordia's formation. He issued new orders and the fleet's fighters shifted position, pushing deeper into the heart of the Concordia's defenses. In the midst of the chaos, a lone human fighter, piloted by Lieutenant Sarah Williams, made a daring move. She weaved through enemy fire and launched a missile directly into the heart of the Concordia flagship, striking its main reactor. The explosion was massive, sending shockwaves through the enemy fleet. "Direct hit," shouted one of the crew members on the Vanguard. The Concordia flagship staggered, its command structure crippled. With their leadership gone, the rest of the Concordia fleet began to falter. The human fleet pressed on, using their superior speed and tactics to press the advantage. Rhodes watched as the battle turned in their favor. The Concordia, once so confident, was now on the defensive. But there was no time to celebrate yet. The fight wasn't over, and the Concordia would not go down without a final, desperate push. But humanity had already shown the galaxy its strength. The flames of war had burned brightly, and with each passing moment, the outcome was becoming more certain. This was only the beginning of the new chapter in the galaxy's history, and humanity, against all odds, was writing it. The battle was far from over. Though the Concordia flagship had taken a massive blow, the remaining ships in the Concordia fleet were far from beaten. General Xavier Rhodes stood at the command center of the Vanguard, his hands gripped tightly to the console. His heart raced as he watched the battle unfold. The tide had turned in humanity's favor, but there was no time to relax. The Concordia was regrouping and launching a fierce counterattack. "All hands, brace for impact," Rhodes shouted as the ship rocked from an enemy blast. The Vanguard's shields flared brightly before absorbing the energy of the strike, but the constant barrage of fire from Concordia ships was relentless. Humanity's fleet had managed to weaken the Concordia's leadership, but the enemy was not giving up without a final fight. "Colonel Torres," Rhodes called, his voice steady despite the chaos. "How are our forces holding up?" Colonel Evelyn Torres, his ever-reliable second-in-command, was at her station, eyes darting between multiple screens. "We've lost a few more ships, General, but we're still holding our position. The Concordia is trying to reorganize, but their fleet is fractured. They're not operating with the same coordination they had before." Rhodes nodded, but he knew the danger wasn't over. The Concordia's leaders may have been knocked out, but their powerful ships and experienced crews still posed a threat. The humans' advantage was their speed and agility, but if they were not careful, they could still be overwhelmed. "Prepare the fleet for a final push," Rhodes ordered. "We need to end this today. We can't afford to drag this out any longer." Torres turned to relay the command, and soon the message spread through the fleet. Humanity would not wait for the Concordia to recover. They would strike while they had the chance. As the human fleet advanced, they were met with a desperate resistance. The Concordia, despite their disarray, fought with the fury of a wounded animal. Every ship in the human fleet was pushing forward, and the Vanguard led the charge, its cannons blasting away at the remaining Concordia vessels. In the heart of the battle, Lieutenant Sarah Williams, the young pilot who had dealt the fatal blow to the Concordia flagship earlier, was once again in the thick of it. Her small fighter, the Phoenix, zipped through space like a comet, weaving in and out of enemy fire. The adrenaline was pumping in her veins as she locked onto a target, a massive Concordia battleship. Her hands gripped the controls tightly as she guided the Phoenix toward the enemy ship, narrowly avoiding an incoming missile. "This is it," she whispered to herself as she launched a volley of missiles. The explosion rocked the Concordia battleship, sending it careening off course. But there was no time to celebrate. She quickly adjusted her course, dodging yet another wave of enemy fire. Back on the Vanguard, Rhodes and Torres watched the battle unfold on the screens. The Concordia was falling back, but their ships were still dangerous, still fighting. It was clear now. The final victory was within reach. But it was not guaranteed. The human fleet had taken heavy losses and many ships were on the verge of being overrun. "General," Torres said urgently, "we've lost contact with several of our flanks. If we don't push harder now, we might lose the advantage." Rhodes stared at the chaotic scene unfolding before him. He knew Torres was right. They had to break the Concordia's resolve now, or they could end up losing everything they had worked for. He made his decision. "All ships, initiate the final assault." "Rhodes," commanded, his voice resolute. "This ends now." Humanity's fleet surged forward in a coordinated strike. The ships focused on the remaining Concordia vessels, targeting their engines, their weapons, and their command centers. The battle turned into a frantic, desperate struggle. Explosions filled the void of space, and the energy from laser fire and missiles lit up the darkness. As the battle raged on, the Vanguard received one last transmission, a signal from a surviving Concordia vessel. It was a surrender. "We've had enough," came the voice over the comms. "You've broken us. We can't continue this fight." Rhodes stared at the message, his mind processing the meaning of what had just happened. It wasn't a victory won by sheer might alone, but by outsmarting and outlasting a superior force. Humanity had proven that it could survive, adapt, and rise to challenge even the greatest power in the galaxy. "Send the response," Rhodes said, his tone firm. "Tell them we're ready to negotiate but will not be intimidated." War wasn't over, but the final battle had been won. For the first time in history, humanity had earned its place among the galaxy's most powerful civilizations. And while many challenges still lay ahead, one thing was clear. Humanity was no longer just a footnote in the galactic struggle. They were a force to be reckoned with. The silence after the battle was deafening. The vast emptiness of space seemed to stretch endlessly, broken only by the occasional flicker of damaged ships struggling to remain in orbit. The final assault had shattered the Concordia's will to fight. And now, as humanity's fleet regrouped, the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. They had won. The Concordia had surrendered, their leadership broken, and their fleet in disarray. The war that had ravaged the galaxy for so long was finally coming to an end. General Xavier Rhodes stood at the command center of the Vanguard, his face a mask of exhaustion. He had led his fleet through countless battles, faced overwhelming odds, and lost many good men and women along the way. Yet here he was on the brink of something extraordinary, something no one had thought possible. "We did it," Colonel Evelyn Torres said, her voice almost in disbelief. She looked at the screens in front of her, which now displayed the damaged remnants of the Concordia fleet. "We actually did it." Rhodes nodded, his expression solemn. The victory had come at a high cost. Thousands of lives had been lost, and many ships were now nothing more than drifting wreckage. The toll of the war was clear, but there was also a sense of relief in the air. Humanity had fought not just for survival, but for their future in the galaxy. "We've secured a peace agreement," Torres continued, handing him a data pad. "The Concordia is willing to talk. They want to negotiate terms for a ceasefire." Rhodes took the data pad, his eyes scanning the words on the screen. It was a moment of truth. The Concordia, once a dominant force in the galaxy, was now willing to listen to humanity. It was an opportunity, but also a challenge. They could demand reparations, territory, or even make them bow to human authority. But Rhodes knew that the future of the galaxy wouldn't be built on humiliation or revenge. It had to be built on something more. "We'll approach this with strength, but also with wisdom," Rhodes said, handing the data pad back to Torres. "Humanity will no longer be seen as just a small, weak species. We've earned our place, and we'll show the galaxy what we stand for. But we won't rule with fear. We'll build a new order, one based on respect and cooperation." Torres looked at him, nodding in agreement. "It's a new beginning, General. Not just for us, but for everyone in the galaxy." On Earth, the news of the victory spread like wildfire. People cheered in the streets, celebrating the end of a war that had seemed endless. President Ann Novak addressed the public, her voice filled with pride. "Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for humanity, We have proven to the galaxy that we are strong, resilient, and capable of achieving greatness. We will not seek revenge, but we will ensure that the future is built on peace and understanding. The cameras panned to the stars above, where the remnants of the Concordia fleet drifted, broken but not destroyed. The humans had shown the galaxy their strength, but now they would show it their ability to rebuild, to move forward, and to lead. Back aboard the Vanguard, Rhodes stared out, the viewing port at the distant stars. The war was over, but the work had only just begun. The galaxy was vast and there would be challenges ahead, but humanity had proven that they could face them head-on. For the first time, they were no longer outsiders in the galactic community. They were players. The peace talks would take time. The road ahead would be long, but the future was now in humanity's hands. General Rhodes knew that they had earned this moment. It was theirs to shape. The dawn of a new era had arrived, and humanity was ready to rise,